Well, in Afghanistan, 26 people are now dead after attacks on this election day, according to reports by the Associated Press. In the aftermath of this violence, the count now begins for the votes that were cast. But just how many Afghans defied threats of violence and were able to turn out to vote in the presidential election remains unclear. For more on this, Alex Thier, director of the United States Institute of Peace's Future of Afghanistan project. He joins us now live from Washington. Alex, we should mention, is a former legal advisor to the Afghan Constitutional and Judicial Reform Commission from 2002 through 2004. So you're very familiar with the region. Alex, this election has been described as flawed at best. How key is this, and depending on the results, how much of a shift will there be in relations between the U.S. and Afghanistan?
The outcome of the election is critical for U.S. policy in the region. This is a test not only for the candidates themselves in terms of who's going to lead Afghanistan, but it's also a test for the work of the international community in Afghanistan for nearly the last 8 years. If we are not able to provide sufficient security to be able to pull off an election at this point, then it looks bad. At the same time, the Taliban vowed to disrupt the election, and if it went off fairly well, then it looks like the government and the international community are doing well. So people's perceptions of this election are going to be very important for the next year.
All right. How you judge success? Well, President Obama made clear, though, that Afghanistan is going to be front and center in terms of priorities on the foreign policy front of his administration, pledging about $3 billion in aid. Where has that money gone?
Well, so far, there has been an enormous amount of work that's been done in Afghanistan. We've laid thousands of kilometers of road, built hundreds of schools. And so that money is, in fact, going into Afghanistan. But a lot of it, unfortunately, doesn't make it down to the community level, either because of subcontracting or corruption. The money that we've spent hasn't been as effective as it should have been. And the Obama administration is promising to put more money in. But to complement that, we also need an Afghan government that's going to make sure that the money is being spent properly. And so, again, this election can be quite important in putting a new face on the relationship between the United States and Afghanistan.
We should mention NATO Secretary General had said today that he considers the Afghan elections to have been a success, at least in terms of security provided. But, Alex, from what we're hearing from reports, there's very much a regional concentration of who was able to vote and who turned out at the polls. Can you give us a sense of how important this election is in terms of maintaining a cohesiveness among the Afghan people and some of the different ethnic populations within those borders?
It would be very problematic if certain parts of the country were not able to vote. For instance, in the south, where most of the U.S. forces are, and there's a lot of fighting, that's where the Pashtuns are, who are the largest ethnic group in Afghanistan. If they weren't able to get out to vote in sufficient numbers and don't feel that their voice was heard, then that will certainly affect the legitimacy of the outcome. What we're hearing from preliminary reports indicate that turnout was low overall, but not terrible, and that violence did affect some parts of the country, but that voting was able to go ahead in every province. And so I don't think that there was a knockout blow in the sense that people weren't able to vote in large parts of the country. But, of course, it's too early to say because we don't have those numbers, and most observation reports that are coming in are from cities, and the vast majority of the Afghan population lives in rural areas.
Alex, what we're really talking about here gets at that fundamental, political theory conversation of can you have democracy or political development without economic development, without political security at the very heart of the matter here. But the Obama administration's point man on Afghanistan, Richard Holbrooke, has indicated, weaning people off of the opium trade, perhaps economic development, perhaps layoffs, rolling out of a banking system are all part of this strategy in Afghanistan now. What has been done in terms of infrastructure, in terms of building of the economy in Afghanistan?
I believe we haven't focused nearly enough on Afghanistan's economy. I think that it's probably a truism to say that people who are better off as a result of the economy are less likely to engage in the insurgency. And so employment and agriculture are going to have to be much more significant focuses of our policy in the next few years. That also impacts the opium trade. Afghanistan supplies over 90% of the world's opium, and the way to get people off of opium is not just by cutting down the flowers, it's by providing them with an economic alternative.
Thank you so much, Thier.